The Mechanical Rose. Chapter 1. The Spark. Edgar Lawson lived in the heart of London, in a narrow brick building tucked between a bakery and a tailor's shop. His workshop was small, but full of life in its own way. The walls were lined with shelves holding jars of screws, coils, and tiny tools. The floor was scattered with sketches, half-built devices, and copper wires that curled like vines. The air smelled of oil and warm metal. Edgar spent most of his days alone, working quietly with his machines. He didn't mind the silence. He found comfort in the rhythm of gears and the soft ticking of clocks. He was only 29, but his eyes looked older, shaped by long nights and quiet thoughts. He was known in the neighborhood as the man who could fix anything. People brought him broken watches, music boxes, and lamps. He repaired them with care, always returning them better than before. But Edgar didn't speak much. He nodded politely, took the items, and returned to his workshop. He didn't go to parties or walk in the park. He didn't write letters or read novels. His world was made of brass and steam, not words and feelings. Yet something inside him had started to shift. One rainy afternoon, Edgar sat by the window, watching drops slide down the glass. The city outside was gray and quiet. He felt a strange emptiness, like a missing piece he couldn't name. He looked around his workshop, at the machines he had built, the tools he had mastered. They were clever, useful, even beautiful. But none of them made him feel whole. He wanted to create something different. Not just a machine, but something that could speak without sound. Something that could hold meaning. That was when the idea came to him, a rose. Not a real one, but a mechanical rose. A flower made of metal, gears, and springs. It would bloom only once, then stop forever. It would be a symbol of something rare and fragile. Edgar didn't know why this idea felt so important. He didn't know what it meant. But he knew he had to build it. He felt a quiet spark inside, like a small flame in the dark. It was not logic. It was not science. It was something else. He began to sketch the design. He drew petals shaped from thin sheets of brass, curved with care. He planned a central mechanism that would open the flower slowly, like a breath. He chose materials that would shine in the light but age with time. He wanted the rose to feel alive, even though it was made of metal. He worked for hours, adjusting the gears, testing the springs. He didn't speak. He didn't eat. He just built. As the days passed, Edgar felt something change in him. He was still quiet, still focused, but his thoughts were softer. He remembered things he had forgotten, moments from his past, faces he had once loved. He didn't write them down. He didn't speak them aloud. But they lived in the rose. Every part of it held a memory, a feeling, a hope. It was not just a machine. It was a message. The rose was not finished yet, but Edgar already felt its presence. It stood on his work table, half-built, glowing in the lamplight. He touched it gently, feeling the cool metal under his fingers. He knew it would bloom only once. And he knew that moment would matter. He didn't know when or why. But he was ready to wait. In the quiet of his workshop, surrounded by gears and silence, Edgar Lawson had found something new. Not in the machines, but in the space between them. A spark. A beginning. A rose. Chapter 2. The Memory. As Edgar worked on the rose, something began to change inside him. At first, it was only a feeling, a quiet ache that came when he shaped the petals or adjusted the tiny gears. But soon, the feeling turned into a memory. He started to think about Clara. Her name came to him like a whisper, soft and unexpected. He had not thought of her in a long time, or at least he had tried not to. But now, as he built the rose, her image returned with every movement of his hands. Clara had been different from anyone he had ever known. She was an artist who painted with bright colors and wild strokes. She loved the sky, the wind, and the sound of music in the street. She laughed easily and cried without shame. She believed that life was meant to be felt, not measured. Edgar had loved her, though he never said it in the way she wanted. He showed her his inventions, hoping she would understand. But Clara wanted more than gears and wires. She wanted warmth, attention, and time. Edgar gave her machines instead. They had parted quietly, without anger. Clara had packed her brushes and left one morning while Edgar was working on a clock. He didn't stop her. He thought she would come back. But she didn't. And he buried the memory deep inside, focusing on his work. Now, years later, the rose brought her back. Every petal he shaped reminded him of her fingers, always stained with paint. Every spring he wound made him think of the bracelets she used to wear, made of glass and thread. The soft click of the gears echoed the sound of her laughter. Edgar didn't try to stop the memories. He let them come. He welcomed them like old friends. He realized that the rose was not just a machine. It was a message to someone he had lost. It was a way to say what he never said. It was a way to feel what he had once ignored. He worked through the nights, forgetting to eat, forgetting to sleep. The oil on his hands mixed with the ink from his sketches. His eyes were tired, but he didn't stop. He wanted the rose to be perfect. Not perfect in design, but perfect in meaning. He wanted it to carry something real. Something human. He didn't know if Clara would ever see it. He didn't even know where she was. But it didn't matter. The rose was for her, even if she never touched it. It was for the part of him that still remembered her voice, her smile, her way of seeing beauty in broken things. As the rose took shape, Edgar felt both joy and sadness. He smiled when the petals moved as planned. He cried when the mechanism failed and had to be rebuilt. He talked to the rose sometimes, not with words, but with silence. He gave it his time, his care, his heart. And in return, the rose gave him something he had not felt in years, a sense of connection. A sense of love, even if it was only a memory. The workshop was still full of machines, but now it felt different. The air was softer. The light was warmer. The rose stood in the center of the table, half finished, but already alive in its own way. Edgar looked at it and saw more than metal. He saw a story, a feeling, a truth. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if the rose would ever reach Clara. But he knew why he was building it. Not for fame. Not for science. But for love. A love that had once been real. A love that still lived in the quiet corners of his mind. A love that had waited, like a rose, for the right moment to bloom. Chapter 3. The prototype. After several long weeks of work, Edgar Lawson stood in his workshop and looked at the rose he had built. It was almost finished. The petals were thin and smooth, made from polished brass that caught the light like gold. Each petal curved gently outward, shaped with care and patience. The stem was strong, made of copper and steel, with tiny screws holding it together. Inside the rose, hidden beneath the petals, was a small and delicate mechanism. It was made of gears, springs, and tiny levers. Edgar had designed it to open the flower slowly, just once, and then stop forever. The rose would bloom only once, like a moment in time that could not be repeated. He had never built anything like this before. Most of his inventions were practical: clocks, tools, small machines for everyday use. But the rose was different. It had no purpose except beauty. It was not meant to last. It was meant to speak, not with words, but with motion. Edgar had put everything into it. Not just his skill, but his memories, his emotions, and his quiet hope. He had worked through cold nights and long days, forgetting meals and ignoring the world outside. The rose had become his world. And now, it was almost ready. He decided the rose should bloom on the day he saw Clara again. That thought gave him strength. Clara had once been the light in his life. She had loved color, music, and stories. She had painted flowers that looked like dreams. Edgar had loved her, but he had never known how to show it. He had chosen machines over moments, silence over feeling. Now, he wanted to give her something that could speak for him. Something that could say what he had never said. But he didn't know where she was. He had not seen her in years. He began searching. He asked old friends, visited places they had once gone together, and wrote letters to people who might know her. He looked through art catalogs, hoping to find her name. He walked through galleries, searching for her style. Every day, he returned to the workshop and adjusted the rose, making sure it was perfect. He tested the mechanism again and again, watching the petals move with slow grace. He imagined Clara's face when she saw it. He imagined her smile, her silence, her eyes. The rose became more than a machine. It became a promise. A promise to remember, to feel, to try. Edgar knew it might be too late. Clara might not want to see him. She might have moved on. But the rose was not about changing the past. It was about honoring it. It was about showing that he had learned something. That he had grown. That he had found a way to turn metal into meaning. He placed the rose in a wooden box lined with velvet. He locked the box and kept it near his desk. Every morning, he opened it and looked at the rose. He didn't touch it. He just looked. It reminded him of what he was working toward. It reminded him of Clara. It reminded him of the moment he hoped to share. The search continued. Edgar sent more letters, followed more clues, and waited for answers. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. He believed that if the rose was meant to bloom, the moment would come. And when it did, he would be ready. The rose would open once and then stop. But in that single bloom, everything he had felt, everything he had lost, and everything he had hoped for would live. Just for a moment. Just enough. Chapter 4. The Meeting. After weeks of waiting, Edgar finally received a letter. The handwriting was familiar, soft and flowing, and the name at the bottom made his hands tremble. Clara had replied. She lived in a quiet town by the coast, far from the noise and smoke of London. She taught art at a small school, helping children learn how to paint and draw. Her words were kind but careful. She said she remembered him, and she was willing to meet. Edgar read the letter many times before packing his things. He placed the mechanical rose inside a wooden box lined with velvet, wrapped it gently, and locked it with a small brass clasp. Then he boarded a train, carrying the box close to his chest. The journey was long and quiet. Edgar watched the countryside pass by through the window. Fields, rivers, and hills moved like memories. He thought about Clara, about the years they had spent apart. He wondered what she looked like now, how she spoke, how she smiled. He didn't know if she would welcome him or turn him away. But he knew he had to try. The rose was ready, and so was he. When he arrived, the town was peaceful. The streets were clean, the houses small and neat. He walked slowly, following the directions from her letter. Her home was near the school, with a garden full of wildflowers and a small bench under a tree. Clara opened the door herself. She looked different, but still familiar. Her hair was shorter, her clothes simpler, her eyes deeper. She had changed, but not in a way that erased who she had been. She was calmer now, wiser, like someone who had learned to live with both joy and loss. Edgar greeted her quietly and stepped inside. The house smelled of paint and tea. The walls were covered with drawings, some bright and playful, others soft and thoughtful. Clara offered him a seat, and he placed the box on the table. He opened it slowly, revealing the rose. The petals caught the light, glowing with a soft golden shine. The stem stood firm, and the mechanism inside waited in silence. Edgar explained why he had made it. He told her about the nights he had spent building it, about the memories that had guided his hands, about the hope that had kept him going. He didn't ask for anything. He only wanted her to see it. Clara listened without speaking. Her eyes moved from the rose to Edgar's face, then back again. She reached out and touched the petals gently. Then Edgar activated the mechanism. The rose began to bloom. The petals opened slowly, one by one, with a quiet click. The motion was smooth, graceful, like a breath held and released. When the rose was fully open, it stood still, shining in the light. Clara smiled. It was a soft smile, full of warmth. But her eyes were sad. She said she was grateful. The rose was beautiful. The gesture was kind. But their time had passed. Edgar felt the words like a soft wind. He didn't argue. He didn't ask for more. He understood. The rose had bloomed, not for a new beginning, but for a memory. It was a way to honor what had been, not to change what was. Clara had moved forward, and now, so could he. They sat together for a while, sharing silence. Then Edgar closed the box, thanked her, and left. As he walked back to the station, the air felt lighter. The rose had done what it was meant to do. It had spoken without words. It had carried love, regret, and hope in its single bloom. Edgar didn't feel empty. He felt complete. The rose had bloomed once, and that was enough. Chapter 5. The Letter. Back in London, Edgar Lawson returned to his quiet workshop. The streets were busy, the air thick with smoke and steam, but inside his small space everything was still. The tools were where he had left them, the sketches untouched, and the wooden box with the rose sat on the table, waiting. He opened it slowly and looked at the flower. The petals were frozen in bloom, the mechanism silent. It had done what it was meant to do. It had opened once, and now it would never move again. But it still held something, something warm, something real. Edgar sat down at his desk and took out a sheet of paper. He dipped his pen in ink and began to write. The words came slowly, but they came from the heart. He didn't ask Clara to return. He didn't try to change her mind. He simply thanked her. He thanked her for the time they had shared, for the light she had brought into his life, for the way she had taught him to see beauty beyond machines. He wrote about the rose, how it had helped him remember, how it had helped him feel. He told her that the rose had bloomed for her, not to win her back, but to honor what they had once been. He wrote about the silence between them, and how it had taught him something important. That love was not always about being together. Sometimes it was about holding a memory gently, without trying to change it. Sometimes it was about keeping the light inside, even when the person who gave it to you was far away. Edgar didn't write with sadness. He wrote with peace. He had found something in the process of building the rose, something he had never found in gears or wires. He had found a way to say goodbye without pain. When the letter was finished, he folded it carefully and placed it in an envelope. He sealed it and walked to the post office, sending it without hesitation. Then he returned to his workshop and placed the rose on a shelf near the window. It no longer moved, but it still caught the morning sun. The light touched its petals, making them glow softly. Edgar looked at it each day, not with longing, but with quiet joy. It reminded him of Clara, of the time they had shared, of the moment the rose had bloomed. He didn't speak about the rose to anyone. It was his secret, his story. People came to him with broken machines, and he fixed them with skill and care. But the rose stayed untouched. It was not meant to be repaired or changed. It was complete. Edgar knew that some things were not meant to last forever. Some things were meant to shine once and then rest. The rose had done that. And so had his love. In the quiet of his workshop, Edgar found peace. He worked, he lived, and he remembered. The rose stood as a symbol, not of loss, but of understanding. It had taught him that love could live in silence, in memory, in the soft glow of morning light. And that was enough. Chapter 6. The Legacy. Years passed quietly, like pages turning in a book no one rushed to finish. Edgar Lawson grew older, but his hands remained steady and his mind sharp. His workshop in London became well known among inventors, artists, and curious thinkers. People came from different parts of the city to ask for his help. Some brought broken clocks, others brought ideas they couldn't build alone. Edgar welcomed them all with calm eyes and quiet focus. He never spoke much, but his work spoke for him. His machines were clever, precise, and full of care. He never rushed. He never showed off. He simply built what was needed. Over time, Edgar became a respected figure in the world of invention. His name appeared in journals and newspapers. He was invited to exhibitions and meetings, but he rarely attended. He preferred the quiet of his workshop, the smell of metal and wood, the soft ticking of gears. He taught a few apprentices, young people who wanted to learn not just how to build, but how to think. He showed them how to listen to the materials, how to respect the process, how to find meaning in the smallest details. But there was one thing he never taught. He never spoke about the rose. The mechanical rose still stood in the corner of his workshop, on a small wooden shelf near the window. It had not moved since the day it bloomed. The petals were open, frozen in perfect shape. The brass still shone in the morning light, and the copper stem held firm. Dust never settled on it. Edgar cleaned it gently every week, as if it were alive. No one knew its story. Visitors admired it, but they didn't ask. It looked like a decoration, a quiet piece of art. But to Edgar, it was more than that. It was a memory, a message, a moment that had passed but never faded. One day, a young apprentice named Thomas noticed the rose and asked why it didn't move. He had seen many machines in the workshop, clocks that sang, boxes that danced, tools that worked with steam and light. But the rose was silent. Edgar looked at the boy and smiled softly. He said the rose had already bloomed. And that was enough. Thomas didn't understand, but he nodded. He felt that the answer was complete, even if it was mysterious. Edgar never explained further. He believed that some things were meant to be felt, not described. The rose had bloomed once, and in that moment, it had carried everything: love, regret, hope, and peace. It didn't need to move again. It had done its work. It had lived its purpose. Edgar often sat near it in the evenings, watching the light touch its petals. He didn't think about the past with sadness. He thought about it with quiet joy. The rose reminded him that even the most perfect machines could not measure feelings. They could only hold them for a while, like a breath, like a memory. As Edgar grew older, he continued to build, to teach, and to care. But the rose remained his most personal creation. It was never copied, never sold, never explained. It stayed in the corner, silent and shining. And in that silence, it spoke more than any machine ever could. It became part of his legacy, not as a famous invention, but as a symbol of something deeper. A reminder that love, once felt, never truly disappears. It stays, quietly, in the things we leave behind. Chapter 7. The Echo. When Edgar Lawson passed away, the city of London barely noticed. There was no grand funeral, no long article in the newspaper. But those who knew him, his apprentices, his neighbors, and a few quiet admirers, felt the loss deeply. His workshop, once filled with the soft ticking of gears and the smell of oil and wood, became silent. The tools rested where he had left them. The sketches remained pinned to the walls. And in the corner, near the window, stood the mechanical rose, still open, still shining faintly in the morning light. After some time, the city decided to preserve the workshop as a small museum. It was not large or famous, but it became a quiet place where people could come and see the work of a man who had built with care, not for glory, but for meaning. Visitors walked through the narrow rooms, looking at the strange and beautiful machines Edgar had made. There were clocks that told time with music, boxes that opened like puzzles, and tools shaped like birds and stars. But no invention drew more attention than the rose. The rose did not move. It did not tick or glow. It stood still, its petals frozen in a perfect bloom. Yet people were drawn to it. They stood in front of it for long minutes, saying nothing. Some smiled. Some cried. Some simply stared. No one knew the full story behind it. There was no plaque, no explanation. Only a small note in Edgar's handwriting that read, "It bloomed once." That was all. And somehow it was enough. Children asked why the rose didn't open. Parents said it had already bloomed. Artists said it looked like a memory. Old couples said it reminded them of something they had once felt. Young lovers said it made them believe in something quiet and true. The rose became more than a machine. It became a symbol. A symbol of love that doesn't fade, even when it cannot return. A symbol of something beautiful that lives on, not in motion, but in presence. The museum stayed open for many years. People came and went. Some left flowers near the rose. Others left notes. One visitor wrote, "This rose speaks louder than words." Another wrote, "It reminds me that love can live in silence." No one touched it. No one tried to fix or change it. They understood that it was complete. That its stillness was part of its message. In time, Edgar's name became known to more people. Not as a great inventor of machines, but as a man who had built something with his heart. The rose was not famous in the way other inventions were. It was not copied or sold. But it stayed in people's minds. It stayed in their stories. It stayed in their hearts. And so, the echo of Edgar's love lived on. Not in sound, but in silence. Not in movement, but in memory. The rose did not need to bloom again. It had already done what it was meant to do. It had captured a moment. It had held a feeling. And that was enough. Moral. True love doesn't need forever. It lives in memory, in gestures, in the things we create. Sometimes one moment is enough to keep it alive forever. Thank you for your attention. If you like the story, please like and subscribe. It motivates us to make new videos and helps us promote the channel. Thank you.